My name is Thais Juvenal. I am a senior forestry officer, team leader of sustainable forest value chains, innovation, and investments here in FAO. I'm based in FAO Rome. For me, it's lunchtime, a very pleasant lunchtime. And wherever you are in the world, thank you so much for joining us in this event today. Be welcome to the event, Global Policymaking and North-South Research Partnerships, examining how to improve governance and policy mechanisms affecting land use, forests, and peoples in the tropics. It's a great honor to chair this critical discussion to make international cooperation more effective in the delivery of sustainability. We know that being able to be inclusive, to really reach those who are responsible for the transformation that we need, is what will give us sustainable landscapes, sustainable agri-food systems, and the climate change objectives we all need to reach. Estimates indicate that 80% of the population in extreme poverty is rural. What makes this debate today very important for the effectiveness of our policies and even an ethical problem that we need to face. 90% of rural population lives within 5 kilometers of a forest. So again, if we combine that with the estimates on extreme poverty in the world, this gives us even more responsibility to make our policies and our interventions effective and responsive to local needs. So it's very important that we can assess international policies, we can understand what we are driving in the field, and our capacity to deliver transformations. I will tell you a very quick story, not a story, actually, an evidence, something that we realized in the work that we did last year here in FAO. You might have read the State of the World Forest 2022, SOFO 2022. It was published last year. And in that publication, we will find the most updated information on values of ecosystem services. Together with the ecosystem ecosystem services valuation database, we were able to put together almost 3,000 entries about value estimates of forest ecosystem services. So we assessed 10 forest types and almost 3,000 entries. And what we realized is that there was a research gap. Mangroves, tropical forests, and temperate forests are by far the forest biomes with the highest number of value estimates, individually exceeding 500 entries each, meaning that only 3 forest types actually have good assessments of their ecosystem services values. All the others, we don't have enough research. Most of this research is driven by international cooperation. So this is a very small example on how our role is important, how our role not only to drive policies, not only to drive policies and research, but also how we generate evidence that can inform better global and local policymaking. With this very short story, I would like to bring you some housekeeping for this meeting. This is a Chatham House event, but as you have seen, this is not a typical Chatham House event. It's an open event. It's being recorded and live streamed on YouTube. A recording will be published on the Chatham House website after this event. There is simultaneous interpretation available in French, Portuguese, and Bahasa Indonesia. To listen in another language, click on the world icon at the bottom of your screen and select the language. Please feel free to submit questions to the panelists throughout the discussion. You can also upvote questions you would like answered, and we will prioritize this. We will have 20 minutes for questions and answers at the end of the event. With no further delay, I welcome Dr. Raoni Rajan, recently appointed the head of the Forest Management Department in the Brazilian Ministry of Environment and Climate Change, for his opening remarks. Thanks a lot for accepting this invitation, Raoni, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Thais. It's very good to see you here. Hello, everybody. Good morning, good evening, good night. As I understand, it's a wild world, and we are talking here across different time zones. So I'm a professor at the Federal University of Minas Gerais, and I was physically conducting my research during this year as a fellowship at the Wilson Center in Washington, D.C. And then I got a call from Minister Marina, and basically literally took the first flight and left wife and kids behind. And so I have to eventually get back there to take them together with my bags and everything, because as you know, it's a very urgent matter and there is no time to lose. So I'm going to be giving here a brief presentation of the plan for, more about the background of the plan for deforestation control policies in Brazil. Not a lot about the future, because that's right now is being discussed and being decided. And so I cannot really, comment on that. But I will be very glad to talk about what has worked on the past or not, and how that could inform the future. So let me just, can you see my screen, right? Great. So as I was mentioning, I've been invited to be part of the Department for Deforestation Control Policies and Fire Control Policies. So it takes both parts, and which is part of the Extraordinary Secretary for Deforestation Control and Territorial Ordering, and which, by the way, it's a very exceptional secretary, because it was created to be to do a mission, which is to zero deforestation by 2030. And when it happens, that secretary is not going to exist anymore. That's why it is an extraordinary secretary. Not so much because it's mainly because it's temporary, and also it has an important role. So very briefly, the main policy to tackle deforestation in Brazil is called PPCDAM, so the deforestation control policy in the Amazon, and it has been very, very successful in dropping deforestation in that biome. It was initially created in the early 2003 by Marina Silva during her first term as Minister of Environment, and by some of the people that now are back in the ministry with her as well. During that time, I was a mere student, actually interviewing those people about those policies, and now I have the honor to be building what might be the fifth phase of PPCDAM. As we know, those policies have been weakened after 2012 and completely discontinued in the previous administration. And now we have the challenge to strengthen that policy across the different lines of work. So the new Ministry of Environment is now called also Ministry of Environment and Climate Change, as a recognition of the importance of such a challenge that is ahead of us. It's made up of, in addition to the cabinet of the minister and executive secretary, 5 secretaries. And it's important to say that it's not all about deforestation control and reducing deforestation. It's also about, for instance, in the Forest Service, which is about the registry and forest management and fostering sustainable forest management in the country. It is also, for instance, the role of the Secretary for Traditional Peoples and Communities and Rural Development, Sustainable Development, to foster and to support those communities. The same thing for bioeconomy and for the urban environment, and also, of course, for the bioeconomy. So as I'm going to be talking here mainly as deforestation control, but it's important to contextualize that the ministry has a much wider mission. And we already have a new decree setting up the main lines of work of the new deforestation control plan. The first point to be to emphasize that's not only about the Amazon anymore, it's about all the 5 biomes in the country. So we have an additional challenge, especially because we have, for instance, in the Cerrado biome, seen a very sharp rise in deforestation in recent years, and especially from last year to this one. And so it is also our role here to be looking at other biomes which are less charismatic, which has less international appeal, but of course are very important for the environment in the whole country. And there are 4 lines of work or axes. There is one about sustainable activities, which in here the bioeconomy secretary, the secretary of the traditional populations will have a very central role in making that happen. There is another one on monitoring and control and environmental control, and that's where command and control, fines, supporting the police, that's where the main the part that involves sanctions, but also production of data about deforestation. Also, we have land ordinance and territorial ordinance, which is very important. Which is going to be the other director besides me. That's going to be that are part of the deforestation control secretary. And finally, we have an axis around normative and economic instruments, including payment for ecosystem services, RED, and this also includes the whole debate around RED, for instance, in relation to the UNFCCC, but also international corporations such as the Amazon Fund, which is the responsibility of this department. And the first meeting, which is an interministerial meeting, involving 17 ministries, and which is presided by the chief of staff. So it has a very high level within the whole government. Is going to be held very soon, and this is to say that the effort of reducing deforestation is not only an effort from the Minister of Environment; it's an effort of the whole country and the whole government. The specific directorship that I'm heading now is actually comprised of other 3 coordinations. One, which is around the deforestation control and fire control policies proper, which has a very strong interface with the forest rangers from IBAMA, from ICMBio, but also the federal police, but also the federal prosecutors, and also the state governments. So it's also about articulating the different bodies that are going there and actually doing the hands-on work of law enforcement, because this department does not have its own workforce for law enforcement, but it has to articulate that work on the ground. Also a monitoring coordinator that's about generating data from all those different departments in very close cooperation with the National Institute for Space Research, INPE, and a coordination of economic instruments. And so we have, even though it has been just a few days of the new government, a month, to be more precise, there are already different actions that have been taken. The first was taken up PP Sedami, PP Cerrado, and we are starting to elaborate the new plans also for the other biomes. So as we speak, we have people on the ground already fighting deforestation and taking on actions which were not possible in the previous administration. We have reopened the Amazon Fund. There's also now the restoration of social participation within the national environmental funds, since participation for civil society has been blocked the previous administration. Also, we have streamlined law enforcement work, especially how the legal sanctions work internally, because it has been made some artificial blockages in that process in the previous administration. Those blockages have been taken out. And also we have revoked a decree which aims to incentivize wildcat mining, garimpo, and as we've seen on those deplorable images of the Yanomami reserve, which is living one of the worst humanitarian crisis in the world right now. We are very ashamed of being Brazilian and seeing that, and part of that, and that is very strongly linked to the uncontrolled widespread of wildcat mining in that region, and we have taken out some of the incentives for that activity in the form of a decree. And finally, we are now recomposing the National Environment Council, which is the main body that rules on environmental matters in Brazil, with strong participation from civil society. So that's it. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm glad to carry on this conversation.
Thank you very much, Raoni, and I think this was kind of a first-hand presentation, should have been one of your first. So thank you very much for bringing us this insightful view on how the new government, the new Brazilian government is structured, and also your role and the challenge that you're facing. I would like to then move to Dr. Tiago Kanashiro Uehara, a Chatham House Research Fellow in the Environment and Society Program, who will present to us the overarching view of this research. Tiago, please.
Thank you, Thais, and thank you, Raoni, as well. Well, I think it's my job today, basically, to introduce an exciting project that Chatham House has been working with SEBRAP in Brazil, who is their speaker for the day here, and CTSS with IPB University in Indonesia. Damayanti is representing them today, as well as CEPAS in Kinshasa with Kasmu Teba, also sharing with us some of the lessons we learned in this collaboration. You might be wondering why we labeled the panel Glocal policymaking, and why we are talking about research partnerships, and why that comes before we talk about forest governance or land use governance. And I'd like to share with you a preview of a video we just produced explaining a bit of the concept of how we can glocalize policymaking, and how we can implement more actable research partnerships. So if I may, I will use your audio as well. I'm sharing my screen.
How can development and sustainability projects go hand in hand with increasing equitable partnerships between the North and the South?
In this video, we highlight a partnership and how it can inspire future projects to increase diversity in collaboration and advance equitable partnerships for sustainable development.
Let's begin by telling you more about who we are.
We are a group of researchers from 4 policy institutes around the world: Centro Brasileiro de Análise e Planejamento Sustainability Center in Brazil, Centre d'études pour l'action sociale in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, IPB University's Center for Transdisciplinary and Sustainability Sciences in Indonesia, and Chatham House in the UK.
We got together to develop new ideas for strengthening international cooperation in the transition towards a sustainable future.
We looked at international cooperation through the lens of forest governance. More specifically, we studied 4 policy instruments implemented worldwide with nation-specific case studies: the Forest Stewardship Council and the REDD+ Amazon Fund in Brazil, economic recovery loans conditioned on new regulations on forests and logging concessions in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Indonesia's SVLK Timber Sustainability Assurance System, co-sponsored by the EU. Our analysis on North-South trade agreements by institutes in Brazil, the DRC and Indonesia encourages the glocalization of critiques of such mechanisms affecting forest lands and peoples. What does the term glocalizing mean?
It can be defined as rectifying imbalances between global and local in international cooperation generally, and in research partnerships specifically between policy institutes in the Global South and Global North.
International collaboration between the Global North and Global South contributes to the progress of glocalizing. Co-creation and co-leadership for sustainable transitions, especially regarding context-specific mechanisms, increase the participation of local communities and local knowledge, keeping in mind the local, national, and regional priorities.
Equity was managed by establishing a fair decision-making process within the research partnership right from the start to avoid following a neo-colonial research model. Each country partner defined their research methodologies, choosing relevant case studies as a pathway towards independent thinking. A clear set of ground rules on the relationships among partners and the necessity to make communication central were also key.
Overall, the project contributes to ideas, methods, solutions, and critiques of transnational mechanisms that affect forest lands and peoples. Our recommendations include the need to address the problematic gaps in solutions crafted away from constituencies in the developing world. The need for focal countries and firms in the global north to understand the cultural and context-specific issues and priorities in a diverse world. The need to confront and acknowledge power dynamics of privilege and marginalization.
Each case study also helped us come up with recommendations related to the mechanism. The Brazilian Red Plus initiative contributed to certain non-monetary well-being indicators, as well as more inclusive forums in the country which differs from the FSC certification for smallholders. A moratorium on new logging concessions would not benefit the Congolese population due to high levels of corruption in the case of land use regulations in the DRC. Legality verification systems tend to favor large companies rather than smallholders like the SVLK in Indonesia. Commodity-centered approaches need to be complemented by stronger environmental policies and regulations coupled with mechanisms to guarantee human rights and the well-being of all.
This project also emphasized the disconnect between theory and practice and how it needs to be disrupted. While we consider that governance of natural resources involves multiple actors and interests, it is crucial to address their social, ecological, and geographical complexities too.
This was done through a series of conversations in Brazil, the DRC, Indonesia, and the UK, by providing a platform for experts to share their expertise and perspectives. Our experts explored how to enhance international dialogues on forests and land use by including principles of equity, diversity, and inclusivity.
This small example of an equitable partnership in forest governance and innovative policy research can be replicated, improved, and complemented in different localities, focusing on different development issues. We do this to raise standards for the protection of people, the environment, and the well-being of all.
That's, I believe, the best way for me to explain the conceptualization of what we've been working with the partners in the past 20 months or so. And I'm looking forward to the Q&A session. Back to you, Thais.
Thank you, Thiago. Very good introduction to our panel. So I'm now happy to give the floor to Professor Damayanti Bushori, Dami. She is the chair of the Center for Transdisciplinary and Sustainable Science in the IPB University in Indonesia, and she'll tell us about their assessment of the BPA commodity-related process in Indonesia. Dami, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you so much. So in the next 5 minutes, on behalf of IPB University, I would like to present the research result from Indonesia. And the title of our research is Implementation of Indonesia Sustainability and legality assurance system, or SVLK, under different forest rights regimes. A little bit history of SVLK. I think we've heard that in 2007, Indonesia started the negotiation of the FLEGT. And then by 2013, an agreement was signed between EU and Indonesia on FLEGT. And by 2016, Indonesia became the first country in the world to operationalize the FLEGT licensing scheme. And it is supported by a verification system called SVLK, or Sistem Verifikasi Legalitas Kayu. Now, it's interesting to note that by 2019, Indonesia became the EU's largest FLEGT VPA country trading partner. And that it is said that the timber export has gone up to about 1.1 billion euros. With the dynamic of the policy in Indonesia, we see a policy change through Omnibus Law in 2021. We see that there has been also a shift in the country's SVLK, where before SVLK was more focusing on the verification and traceability. Now it also includes sustainability. So under the SVLK scheme, we can actually look at how is it effective? What is the effectiveness of the SVLK indicator? If you look at the different forest property regimes, looking at the different parameters of sustainability, traceability, and also legality. So that is the objective of our research, looking at the effectiveness itself. So we did a study with many respondents, about 300 respondents, and then also we did a lot of workshops, FGD, etc. So the highlight. Basically, the finding is quite interesting. So we look at the different forest regime, the state forest, meaning forest owned by the state. And then we also look at the private forests, especially the smallholder. So these are the community-based forests, private forests. And then there's also the customary forests. The results showed that through this, through the questionnaires, through the discussions, the many discussions with many people, in terms of legality, it seems that the private forest has the most legal timber. This is because they are planted on land that is clear who own the land. So the farmers own the land. So in terms of legality, it seems timber coming from this private forest is the most legal timber that you can find. However, for the traceability, it's not easy to trace the legality of coming from the private forest, because sometimes smallholders, there are smallholders who has SVLK, and then there are smallholders who does not have SVLK. And during the process, the middleman usually mix the timbers. So the tracing of the timber coming from the private forest can become challenging because of the middleman who take an easy route and just mix all the sources. So that's an interesting finding. It's very legal, but because of the SVLK, not all private forest has SVLK. So if looking at the traceability via the SVLK, then the private forest can face its challenges. Now, with the state forest, of course, because of the SVLK is mandatory, it is easily traceable. However, overcoming illegal logging in the state forest is quite challenging, particularly also because of the non-excludability characteristics of the common resource pool. So in this aspect, you have in the state forest, you have the legality is challenging, but once it has SVLK, it's easily traceable. Okay, now for the sustainability from the private forest, as long as our respondent said, as long as it's profitable, the sustainability is definitely ensured. However, about 52% of the respondents said it really depends on the sustainability really hinges on the profitability of the industry. So once it's not profitable anymore, it is easily, the farmers can easily change. So sustainability of the private forest really depends on whether the smallholder feels that it's still profitable or not. Whereas for the state forest, most of the concessions, the private companies, according to the data that we receive, they said that sustainability is ensured. It's moderate to good condition. However, if there's a high transaction cost, it will interfere with the forest sustainability achievement. What about, our next question is about financial benefit. What about the financial benefit related to the SVLK? The state forest said that, okay, from SVLK, the financial benefit is moderately, yes, there's a benefit of following the SVLK certificate. That is from the state forest. But from the private forest, they said that the benefits are not really perceived by many of the smallholders. So if they do not get help to get the SVLK certificate, they will find it very costly. And so they don't see the benefit of following the SVLK because also the price is not different. So overall, it seems that SVLK in state forest is still effective. Our finding, yeah, and that, however, there are also still the companies, in addition to SVLK, some companies would also add the voluntary certification because it's the market demand for international market. For private forest, we discussed this with the with the Minister of Forestry, and Minister of Environment and Forestry. And it seems that there are an alternative for the private forest. In addition, an alternative of not using SVLK, there is another alternative of what is called the SDOC. I forgot what it's called, self-declaration of conformity. So as long as they can use the self-declaration that this timber is legal, actually that can be enough. So they don't necessarily have to use the SVLK. So that's a very good finding from our research, in that there's an alternative to help the small private forest to achieve legality and traceability. The last one is about customary forest. It seems that SVLK does not apply yet to customary forest because the main problem faced by the from the customary forest right now is actually the rights recognition. So SVLK does not apply at the moment, but it will be interesting to look at what will happen in the future. In the 10 years to come, for instance, will there be an SVLK needed for customary forest? So that question remains to be answered in the future research. One, I would like to add just one comment in that based on our finding, also the private forest stated that they hope that they can be helped. What they need most is that technical solution, because they have a lot of problem with pest and disease. And so this is another thing that they are looking at, whether the SVLK can also help them to achieve sustainability production that can be cut off because of the attack of pest and disease. Okay, I think that's a highlight of our research result. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dami, for this insightful presentation. It's very interesting to see how the different types of forests and stakeholders react to this to the legality, traceability policies. So without further delay, so that we can have time to questions, I would like to move to Cas Muteba. And Cas, are you there? Bonjour. I don't know whether it's only his camera or whether he's not hearing us. Cas, could you confirm that you are online? Bonjour, Cas. Cas Muteba.
Hey, it's Thiago speaking. We may want to move on with Louise and then see if Cas will join us.
Okay, thank you. We're moving to Louise Nagakawa. She is a researcher at the Brazilian Center for Analysis and Planning, and she will present us the case for Brazil. Louise, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Thais. Good morning, good evening, afternoon, everyone. I will speak in Portuguese since I have just 5 minutes to go to the point. So, muito obrigada pelo convite. Vou compartilhar
So thank you very much for the invite. I'm going to share with you very quickly some findings on our research project conducted in the last 18 months. So basically, Brazil has different mechanisms. We do have different facilities of forest governance. The PPC dam is one of them, as Dr. Roni Hajan has just shared with us a few minutes ago. But we decided to bring a little bit the perspective of the Amazon Fund, which has gone through some issues. But now we are restarting it, and the FSC certification implemented in Brazil, looking to the certification of small holders and community groups. So that was the main starting point for us. And beforehand, we thought that, we don't have a silver bullet to solve all the issues of the reducing deforestation and to look at the forests in an integrated way, promoting sustainability and inclusion. So our hypothesis was that since we don't have like a silver bullet to solve all the different issues, at least we needed to do, and the hypothesis we started off with was that we would need facilities to integrate both initiatives, projects, proposals linked to the government, that is to say, state-owned mechanisms, and also private-owned mechanisms. And it is key, the international cooperation in this governance. So what we did was to analyze these two mechanisms, which is the Amazon Fund and the FSC certification. And we saw and we reached different findings. I don't have time to share them all with you today, but basically what we had reached as a main findings of our research project, which is very important when we speak about sustainability and inclusion. When we think about these two mechanisms, for example, with the Amazon Fund, we do have a set of indicators to assess if that resource is being well implemented, if it is generating positive outcomes. And usually the indicator which is being used deals with the aspect of the environmental sustainability, how much deforestation has been prevented, how much greenhouse effect gases has been avoided. And speaking with some representatives from the the civil society and the communities, they have highlighted the importance to look to other aspects, which are not only the environmental or the financial aspects. That is to say, that it's not only something that has to be focusing on revenue generation or to guarantee the sale of that product that the community is certifying and producing and trading. So what we have realized is this asymmetry of power among the different actors. It is a huge discrepancy when we have a small remote community inside the Amazon forest, when this community is going to claim for a project of forest management, and there are big producers and big companies when they are also wanting to have access to other type of financing mechanisms or certification. So it was very clear for us that we need to reduce these power asymmetries between the different actors. It is important when we look at the traditional communities and the smallholders, as Dr. Raoni Hajan has mentioned, how the international community and the governments and also the multilateral entities look at the importance of the market access for these traditional communities, access to public policies, access to knowledge and education and training, like technical assistance, for example. How do we reduce this power asymmetry, improving the language we use? For those in the forests, for the forest peoples to understand this language used by the international cooperation, to understand the language used by the markets is quite complicated. It is important, therefore, to really analyze this. We had also debated here within Charterhouse with the colleagues from Indonesia, from the DRC. It is key to take into account the diversity, the plurality of peoples, of different cultures, of different livelihoods, taking into account the different landscapes to reduce these power asymmetries and to give the autonomy to these communities and to allow them to make their own choices. Even looking at the climate changes problems, for example, we ask ourselves if the international policies or international projects implemented there on the ground in the Amazon, for example, or the tropical forests of other countries, are they really taking into account this plurality, this diversity, this local specificity? That is why the video you've seen plays a little bit around with this idea of the glocal, the term glocal. And also when we speak about this, we have to think about the sovereignty also of the indigenous populations and these traditional communities. As I'm wrapping up, I would like to say and to reiterate that any project engaging international donors and these multilateral institutions, they need to take into account metrics, monitoring and assessment methods that really look into the local reality, and that at least they will be able to consider in a more participatory way. When we discuss sustainability and forest governance, what we also want is to speak about participation and inclusion. And I would like to wrap up my words thanking a lot for this invite, for having given me the opportunity to engage in this wonderful project with this sharing of different stories, different methods of assessing and looking at this aspect with my colleagues and dear friends from Indonesia and DRC. At the end of the day, we suffer the same challenges and the same issues. So as Raoni said, and also Tiago said, this is a global issue. It is not only an issue of a specific actor, of a specific sector. It is something that is for everybody, and trying to look for innovative solutions and promoting the participation and inclusion of these actors who are there in the front line, especially suffering the climate changes, it is key for us to think about new policies on regulation and solutions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Luis. I was so focused on what you're saying that I was took a bit of a second. Thank you so much for this presentation, and I think it's already bring us a big question on how to really connect, how international policies and programs can connect with those on the ground, in particular smallholders and the forest communities. I think that you and Dami made an excellent point on what are the difference and the need to adjust to involve these stakeholders. I would like to move to Monsieur Muteba, Cas Muteba. Bonjour. Very good to see you here. Mr. Cas Muteba is the head of program at Ocean, organisation Ocean is the Organisation concertoire des écologistes, concernée des écologistes et des amis de la nature, and a consultant at the Centre d'études pour l'action sociale. He will present to us the case of the Democratic Republic of Congo on the moratorium on the logging concessions. Monsieur Muteba, the floor is yours. Monsieur Muteba, vous êtes muet. Nous ne vous entendons pas. You are on mute, Monsieur Muteba. Yes.
Vous m'écoutez?
Oui, mais
Can you hear me now?
Le Congo il y a eu des moratoires sur les forêts.
We had a moratorium on the forest in the DRC. The moratorium started in 2002 with the forest code reform. Various ministries started from 2002 all the way to 2018, 2019. And every single one did officially that they would uphold this moratorium. However, they breached the moratorium. Today, we noticed that many forests were illegally given out, and this is a breach to this moratorium. We saw that Claude Mugliabo, who was the minister, was then trialed for giving away forests, as this is a breach of the moratorium. This is being discussed in the courts right now. In terms of the moratorium, well, the moratorium, the government wants to stop this moratorium, and there are many different opinions about this. Some people think that this moratorium has lasted too long. Others think that the effect of the moratorium can still be seen today. But Ocean went on the ground and we asked the impacted communities by forest concessions and forest loggings what they thought about the lifting of this moratorium. Most communities think that industrial logging can help them use the forest because they feel completely abandoned by the government. Today, for example, some communities have $500,000 over 5 years, which is about $100,000 per year. depending on specificities. And in these communities, health centers and schools are being built. But in communities where the logging doesn't exist, there is nothing. However, the question on social aspects, well, the government should continue giving out forests for them to live off it. But legality is giving out by ministries. They give out concessions without previous social impact studies, and therefore the money coming from the concessions is giving out illegally and without any study. This is pure corruption. We can also see artisanal as well as high-scale exploitation and logging. This is not for the communities. National and international bodies give out concessions to various political actors, including Chinese actors, who are the first beneficiaries of this illegality. Today, we must strengthen communities' abilities. They need to help strengthening the law and questions related to legality. The administration must follow up and strengthen its follow-up, because we can see that laws do exist, however, they're not being enforced. In some areas, authorities never visit and see what is happening on the ground. And loggers, and especially Chinese loggers, breach human rights. They work with corruption, illegality, and therefore, today, this moratorium has lasted a very long time, and we should revise it. The international community created many policies, however, these are not adapted. Flagged VPAs, for example, what is the impact of this and other policies from the World Bank, the European banks, etc.? We cannot see any impact. These policies come from elsewhere. They are being transposed without local ownership. The various international policy actors should work hand in hand with the government and agree on the interests and the needs of the Congolese people, as well as the national forests. We need to have policies that are adapted to our countries, and we cannot just use a cut and paste process, for example, coming from Indonesia to the Congo. We have a different people, a different mindset, a different culture. We think that partnerships must be sustained, however. However, we need to include the Congolese aspects. Now, in terms of fairness, we have fair trade coffee, for example, and we have started certification processes. However, this has come to a stall because of corruption, because of a lack of correct and adapted laws. We have high commissioners lining their pockets, and communities get nothing. They still live in poverty. When companies leave the region, there is no sustainability in the wealth. There is no win-win market for loggers. Who loses? Companies. Who loses? The communities lose. We'll stop here. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Muteba. Tiago, I believe you have another video to show us.
Not a video this time, I'm afraid. Not that colorful. But I just wanted to bring some of the elements that we as a collective, CEPAS, CBRAPI, CTSS, and Chatham House concluded in this project. So one that is maybe obvious is the call from the think tanks in the Global South for a renovation in transnational or international forest governance mechanisms. And after the case studies and our global forum and consultations in the 3 countries, another key insight that came from the discussions is that international cooperation, donors, philanthropic organizations, they could do well going beyond their focus on commodities and market-based solutions. And as a complementary approach to observing nature in its diversity and complexity, a call by the partners is that future programs have multidimensional well-being indicators as well as sustainable livelihoods as objectives and outcomes of international cooperation. And as the 3 speakers before me highlighted, there's also a call for the establishment of equitable partnerships between institutions in the North and the South. And coming back to the Glocal idea here, I think it's quite striking how our idea of globalization is not like ideas of imposing what is often framed as global ideas. And Kaz made the point that what some often framed as global ideas are global North ideas. And it's not about thinking global, acting local. It is working together with the diversity of geographies and peoples and populations and finding the balances between what is a priority in tropical countries, as well as the overall global priorities that would have to do with, for example, climate change. So I just wanted to highlight some of the insights and recommendations put out there by the 4 partners collectively.
Thank you very much, Thiago. These reflections are really very good. And just making a comment on the 3 presentations, I think that there is an issue. That is how these international policies or international cooperation-driven policies, how we can ensure that they are inclusive, not only of local needs, but of the most vulnerable stakeholders. And this is a challenge already for policymaking at national level. So formulating inclusive policies, inclusive governance arrangements is not trivial. There are specific methodologies for that. But I think what experience shows is that there needs to be a commitment up front to make this present. And for sure, this is valid also for international cooperation. So we cannot take it for granted that a policy focus on sustainability will be inclusive, that a natural impact will be that those most vulnerable will be included. So there needs, I think, to have instruments, to have, first of all, in the formulation of programs, that this is taken very clearly into consideration. I think, as Luis mentioned, it's very important to adjust the monitoring indicators, the measures that we use, and we can only adapt or adopt the good measuring if in our objectives, inclusion and participation of the most vulnerable is already in our primary formulation. I think Dami also raised a very important point on even when the policies, they are adequate to the local needs, we need to consider the transaction costs for some stakeholders to engage, whether it really makes sense for them to engage. So we really need to understand what are the local circumstances and what it means for those who are going to be affected by the policies or that we want to promote via these policies, how we really formulate and what it will mean for them to adopt, what it will mean for them to engage. And Kaz brought a very, I think, very strong point on the need to have not imported policies. So when we speak about international cooperation, really to come up with programs that are joint programs, jointly formulated programs, and that at national level as well, we can have a better understanding of the local circumstances and not having local policies or national policies that are driven by international cooperation formulated without the inputs and without consideration for those who are on the ground. That's a very rich, I think, discussion. It could be easily a much longer event. I will bring two questions to the panel that are actually quite coherent with what Tiago and I just remarked. So there is a question from Henrique Muia, a student of diplomacy and international security. He asks, how can policymakers ensure that the most marginalized and vulnerable groups are considered in the design and implementation of social policies? And there is another very good question also here on how is the bottom-up part of policy development included in these forestry policies. There's a question from Nicholas Watts. He asks us, how is globalism defined in this aspiring project? How are indigenous voices included? We didn't direct this question to anyone in particular, but I think, again, this is very complementary to Mr. Henrique Muia question and the discussions we're having here. So a very brief comment by our panelists, and then I think we will close. Who would like to start? I will go through my screen. Luis?
Thank you for the questions. Trying to answer in Portuguese in very quickly.
It's a huge challenge to think about how we can ascertain greater participation of these actors who are far away and live in a different reality. Sometimes they have difficult access to communication and internet, for example. It may even be a personal choice and they prefer to not have this kind of contact. So honestly speaking, the most important point is, and some fantastic work is being done in the Amazon. So some work in which they assess and listen to the indigenous people. I'm just thinking now about an event that I don't know who the researcher was or who headed it up from Indonesia. She said, talk about the importance of listening to these communities and these smallholders because they're directly impacted. And so, as Kaz said, there are different realities, different cultures, different requirements. So I would say that we need to start by listening what their demands are, what their requirements are, what their challenges are. And only then can we think about how we can adapt policies and adapt projects and initiatives, or even create new initiatives and new projects and new instruments.
Just rush because we are lack of time today. Tiago, I think you want to go next.
Thanks for the question, Eric. I think it's very clear that we shouldn't take the needs of marginalized and vulnerable groups as if the voices were in the assumptions of projects or if their participation were assumed to be guaranteed whenever we work in international corporations. And also, I think it's problematic when the impacts on the marginalized and vulnerable groups are high-level impacts that we do not keep track of. And in order to keep it as a relevant point for policymakers is basically bringing them to the core of policies and objectives. And in our collective paper, we call for the revamping of theories of change and the inclusion, as I just mentioned, of well-being indicators and sustainable livelihoods as outcomes that need to be there. And by doing so, we would be going beyond thinking about the benefits of or how to make greener long supply chains and measuring how green exports are, and which is very important. But if you're serious about marginalization, inequality, ending poverty, ending hunger, those need to be built in the future programming.
Thank you very much, Thiago. I see Raoni would like to provide his views as well.
Yeah, thank you, Thais. I also, was reading through some of the questions, and I see this issue of social participation, and indeed it's very central. And it's my understanding that the Ministry of Environment and Climate is working very closely with the Ministry of Indigenous Peoples, and there is indeed a secretary with that specific focus. And by the way, Secretary Adele, she has a long history as an activist, as someone that has been working on, for instance, REDD+ safeguards for a long time, representing social groups in the Amazon. So that's one of the key concerns here. But also, I would like just to highlight that sometimes we can have some contradictions and some issues, because there are some certain groups that might not be aware of the consequence of their own actions, and that's the role of policy and science to inform them. One example, there is a recent study done by our group at the Federal University of Minas Gerais, their group, then I have to separate, which basically looks at the impact of deforestation at the local level in terms of rainfall. So they have found that because of deforestation, the rainfall season has been shortened a month already in the southern part of the Amazon, and getting worse over time, and with a significant reduction of rainfall, which makes it much harder to have two crops and also to have significant cattle production. And so for every dollar that the deforester earns to himself, he makes his friends and his family and other farmers who do not deforest lose $9. So it's a clear problem of social policy. It's a market failure. It is a tragedy of the commons. And if you ask those farmers, would you like to deforest everything and then you can raise more crops and have more cattle and add value to your land? They would say, yes, I want to deforest everything. So how can we kind of balance, here in the local population, especially the most vulnerable ones, and also presenting a policy vision which benefits everybody, the whole country?
Thank you, Raoni, and sorry for rushing you, but we have 3 minutes to close. Tami, 1 minute.
Okay, just short.
Yeah,
well, okay, first of all, this is a very difficult question, but I think what I would like to say here is reiterating Luis, is listening is very important, and then co-creating the policy. So the process, as opposed to from top to bottom, it should be a bottom-up process, but of course it takes time, and you need to listen and you need to immerse. So I think one of the important things to do is actually there should be a shift from the donor community, in that the donor should not only just look at the market demand, etc., but change the perception of the donor on how is it that the process, the bottom-up process, can actually be the voice of the global community that should be listened and that should be heard by everyone. So there should be a shift from the donor community to look into that. If there's no change in the donor, then of course there's not going to be any inclusion. Of course there will be, but it will be more of an uphill battle. But if the donor change also, that will be important. So I think I'm going to say that last remark, that the donor community has a very strategic role in this.
Thank you, Dami. Ms. Muteba, I don't see you on the screen, and we are really 1 minute to close. So I'll be very, very short to say, listen, incorporate the inputs, prepare good measuring indicators of success, co-creating, so really engaging with this population, working cross-sectorally, because that's one way also of making sure we are engaging with all the relevant stakeholders and make our policies more effective on the ground where it needs, adopting safeguards, and I think that's a very important, from Dami, as a very good conclusion, shift from the donor community as well, and ensuring that bottom-up process are included in the way policies and programs are formulated at global level. So this would be my summary from what we heard today. Thank you so much for such an insightful panel, for sharing all this experience with us. And congratulations on this research. It is really very relevant work for everyone working on international cooperation. And also for those who are recipients of international cooperation, we need to build this together. This cannot be a north-south approach. It needs to be a joint collaboration, a joint work to achieve the results we need. Thank you very much, Chatham House, for the event and for inviting us to this discussion. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.